Please give a round of applause for Jonathan Payne.
Hi, everyone. So one of the things that I find amazing about sustainability is the combination we have of adult problem solving and childlike wonder. When I woke up this morning, I was thinking about what I could say to 9-year-old me who is collecting this trilobite in upstate New York, right? And so I brought it in because today I actually want to put the dead to work, right? Or in other words, what I want to do is to show you how paleontologists studying the history of life can use what we know to make a better future. Now, as I think you've seen before in some of these talks, we are one tiny branch on a giant tree of life that has evolved over the last 3.7 billion years. And like any branch on any tree, we depend on the other branches for our survival. Unfortunately, we're in the midst of cutting this tree down. And the fossil record contains a warning for us. It tells us that mass extinction has happened in the past, at least 5 times in the history of animal life, which spans the last 500 million years. And perhaps more importantly, it tells us that when mass extinction occurs, recovery requires millions of years, which is tens of thousands of human generations. I spend my professional life studying these mass extinction events. And in particular, I've worked a lot on one extinction event, the Permian mass extinction that occurred 250 million years ago. And it's recorded in these rocks from South China that reflect an environment like the Bahamas today or the Great Barrier Reef. These are shallow, tropical, highly diverse ecosystem being recorded in rocks and now uplifted thanks to plate tectonics and exposed for us to study and learn from. And these rocks contain thousands of fossils, millions of fossils that tell us about life before the extinction event, during and after the extinction event. And the chemistry of the rocks tells us about the environments that that life was experiencing. It can tell us about the temperature, the ocean pH, the amount of oxygen available. And here's what that Permian extinction horizon looks like in the rocks. And I brought it with me here to prove to you that you really can hold the world's greatest catastrophe in your hand, right? This is it right there. You can put your finger on it. Come find me later. And this rock contains a couple of warnings or lessons for us. The lower part of the rock, which is very light colored, is full of thousands of shells telling us about a diverse, thriving ecosystem. And right above it, the darker, splotchier part of the rock is a slime world. This is literally the remains of a green microbial mat that was growing on the seafloor because there were too few animals to graze on it or to disrupt it with their burrowing activity. And so one thing we learned from this is that the loss of diversity actually leads to a collapse of abundance. In other words, a less diverse planet simply supports less life. The other thing we learned from the chemistry of the rocks is that the environmental changes that drove this greatest past mass extinction event are the same ones we're worried about today: climate warming, ocean acidification, and ocean deoxygenation, or the loss of oxygen from seawater. And so I like to think about the world in terms of models. And if we start with a climate model, right, we worry about what the climate will be in the future, and how do we know if our model is any good, right? Well, we go back to the past, and we see if our model can reconstruct the past where we know the carbon dioxide levels and we know the temperatures. And if we just went back to 1850, not a lot has changed. The future is outside of the range of the model, and so we wouldn't know if the model's performing terribly well or well enough to capture extreme events in the future, extreme scenarios in the future. And so we use the geological past. We go back tens of thousands of years to the last glacial maximum, or tens of millions of years to the early Eocene, and ensure that the model can actually capture the behavior accurately of an Earth that's very far outside of the system we're experiencing at the moment. And as we model the future, of course, we care about climate because of its effect on life, right? It affects wild biodiversity. It also affects the success of our agricultural crops. And of course, it directly affects human health and the transmission of disease. And so our climate models, we are incorporating biology into the climate models. The question is how to calibrate that, right? We can use local ecological observations that might span days, years, or decades if we're lucky. but they span a very tiny fraction of the surface of the planet. We can take animals out of the ecosystems and do experiments on them in the lab to find out what they can tolerate. But none of this is a global planetary scale experiment of the type that we're actually running. And we don't have other Earths to experiment on, and we don't have enough time to find out what would happen in those experiments. And this is where the geological record is our only source of planetary scale experiments on life, where we change climate by, say, 10 degrees C, as we did at the end of the Permian. And so this is what we've been doing. We've been taking end-Permian climate models from 250 million years ago, ensuring that we get the climate and the environmental changes right using the chemistry from the rocks that we've measured, including that rock right there. And then we start adding ecosystems to them. And the species in those ecosystems have environmental tolerances that we simulate. So we ask, how much temperature change can they tolerate? How much change in oxygen availability can they survive? How much of a drop in ocean pH could they survive? And when we run these models and subject it to this massive climate warming, we find out that we get a lot of extinction everywhere, right? That's not a surprise. This is the worst thing that's happened to the planet in the last 500 million years. What we also find out, though, is that we actually predict in the oceans more extinction near the poles and less extinction in the tropics. And in fact, this is what we see in the geological record. My tropical rocks, which show absolute decimation, are actually the good news. If you went to the poles, it was worse. And so using this model data comparison, we can come back and then put this calibration back into our models of the future and ask, well, what would we expect under a low emissions or a high emissions scenario? And here's the answer. Under low emission scenarios, extinction due to climate change falls into the geological background. In other words, a paleontologist 10 million or 100 million years in the future wouldn't notice this event. It would look like a big nothing burger. If we go on to the high emissions scenario, extinction due simply to climate change, not due to other factors, would be substantial. It would certainly be noticeable to that future paleontologist, and in fact would approach the magnitude of past mass extinction events. And so we really are sitting at a fork in the road. Now, despite the dire warnings from the fossil record, I'm actually an optimist, or I wouldn't be doing this work. As a geologist, I know there's a lot that we can't control. We can't stop the planet from spinning. We can't even stop single lava flows from destroying homes and roads and forests, as people who live in places like Hawaii know all too well, right? We certainly could not stop the eruption of the Siberian Traps Large Igneous Province, which is what caused the end-Permian mass extinction, by spewing out massive amounts of carbon dioxide and enough lava to cover the lower 48 US states a quarter mile deep, right? So we couldn't stop that. But biology isn't geology, right? Life can respond very quickly when we change the circumstances. And so I wanted to end with the example of the northern elephant seal. This is a species that lives on the coast just to the west of the Stanford campus. And when my grandparents were born a century ago, there were 20 to 40 individuals left on the planet. And in fact, a Smithsonian expedition found one of these populations, and guess what they did? They killed 2 of them for posterity, right? If they're gonna be extinct, we wanna have a record. Fortunately, the Mexican and US governments intervened and put a moratorium on the hunting of the elephant seal. And a century later, there are 200,000 individuals on the planet. That's a growth in population of a factor of 1,000 in 100 years. There are more elephant seals in this picture on this one beach at Año Nuevo than there were on the planet when my grandparents were born, right? And this example shows that if we intervene early, or in this case, if we just if we intervene not too late, right? I wouldn't say this is early. This is just not too late. We can make a huge difference, right? We can change how the world looks within our own lifetime, the lifetime of our children and grandchildren. And so that's what I want to leave you with, is that if we intervene on biodiversity through affecting climate, through affecting land conservation, ocean conservation, we can create a world that's better, not just for future generations whom we'll never meet and whose lives we can scarcely imagine, but for ourselves and for the people that we live with today. Thank you.